Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the DFS Army Fantasy Football Show. I'm, of course, your host, Flex Shane. I got my guy today riding in the, I don't think you're the driver's seat. I'm more so a passenger in this ride.
No, I'm
that is life, Mike Dickinson. But yeah, we got Mike in the house, brother. So our third stooge, if you will, Brandon Adam, he is off today. He is apple picking with his wife. So typically, Mike, it's you with the domesticated excuses, driving kids around, etc. But today it's Brandon rocking the apple picking. So listen, tis the season, man. Like, I don't know, like you live in Delaware, Mike, right? So
Yep.
You typically probably have a similar climate to us. Brandon, of course, hails in Colorado, just outside of Denver, and I'm up in Alberta, and it's definitively like fall out up here. So I'm out at the lake actually. So I did a little prayer to the internet gods, Mike, because I had to get out to the lake for this last weekend. It's a long weekend because we have Monday off as a holiday. And man, it's beautiful, man. All the trees are turning colors. And so really what it comes down to is just a little bit of hope with the internet gods and rocking our flex plays for the week. So for those of you who are just joining us for the first time, welcome to the program. We have, of course, the DFS Army Fantasy Football Show. We hail from dfsarmy.com. That is the reason we're all here. Of course, we are here to talk about your season-long fantasy football plays. So if you have flex questions, start-sit questions, that's what we're here to answer today. And of course, we're going to talk about our favorite flex plays of the week, favorable matchups, guys that are probably a decision for you on your bench. And these are the guys that we're going to recommend playing. But of course, why we do this, listen, dfsarmy.com, that's where all of our tools come from. We specialize in, of course, this sweet, beautiful game that is DFS. Primarily, we talk about football, but of course, there's baseball, there's hockey, when there is actually hockey, there's NASCAR, there's MMA. You need it, you want it, we got it at dfsarmy.com. My personal favorite tool, because I like to, do a little bit of my own research, is the matchup tool over at dfsarmy.com. So that's the one I'll typically hold up. That one has projections. It has projected ownerships. It has matchups versus different players at both the quarterback, the wide receiver, the running back, and the tight end position. So go check it out. So enough BS, Mike. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing good. We're on the precipice of week 4 here. We got an okay Thursday night game. Really we're getting into the part of the season now where you start to get a little bit of data. You start to kind of like be able to trust what you see on a weekly basis. And really coming out of this week being 25% done, you want to come out of this week with at least one win. If you're coming out with one win, you're still in a position where you can make a playoff push. I have a league where I'm first in the league in points and I haven't won any games yet. So we talk about regression one way or the other. There's regression coming my way. Like I know there is. I've run into 3 buzzsaws three weeks in a row, and eventually that stops. Eventually you play some lesser teams and you start to win those. So, but as long as you're coming out with a win, you're 1-3, you're 2-2, you're fine. You're 3-1, you're 4-0, you're in a great position. But now is where you start to like set your rosters up. We got 8 teams on bye coming up in the next 2 weeks, and that's really something that you got to start to take a look at. So if you can, once we get through the show today, you've made your flex decisions, you've made your start-sit decisions, then what you want to do is look and see what your schedule looks like, your personal schedule looks like for the next 3 to 4 weeks. And if you can make some ad drops now, Saturday night, Sunday morning, before it costs you a waiver position or fab budget, you're in a much better spot. So if you play in a DST league, look at adding your defenses on bye. Look at adding a defense this week. Maybe you have to drop a handcuff. Maybe you got somebody that's going on bye. Do that. If you're in a 1 QB league, look at when your QB goes on bye. Add a QB who has a good matchup in the next week if your guy's on bye. So start to make those moves now so that you get the guys you want. They're not expensive and it doesn't cost you anything.
Yeah, and I think that's a little bit of an underlooked skill. I mean, obviously, when we talk about just like what goes into a fantasy season, right? The most exciting, the sexiest part of it is the draft. But really, like I challenge you, go back, all you, to teams that you drafted last year. Look at the team in week 1 versus your team in week 14, 15, 16, right? Going into the playoffs. It's going to be dramatically different. Your studs are probably still hanging out there minus injuries, but for the most part, the waiver wire is such a pivotal and important part of the process, and not especially because a lot of the leagues we play nowadays use fab budgets, and that fab especially around the end of the season, it makes a huge difference. So by being able to be a little bit more frugal on the waiver wire by picking up players early, then it helps. It's these micro edges, Mike, is what we say, right? How do you win on the margins? Because honestly, we could roll up to the draft based off ADP, start the highest projected players, and a lot of the times those algorithms will do a pretty good job, right? So if everybody has those same tools, how do we win on the margins? And that is by looking into the future. And listen, we're obviously in simpatico because one of the things I did this morning in my prep was go and look at what are the bye weeks for the next few weeks. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but just so you know, like teams are going to be on buys between weeks 5 and 14. So if you thought it was tough navigating your team with just injuries and all the injuries we've seen for the first few weeks of the season, throw in a few bye weeks, man, and it's going to be hell. You're going to be starting. And listen, part of our usual cadence to our shows at the end of the show is we're going to have Flex Matt because he works on Saturday mornings. Unfortunately, he can't join us. We've got Chashi, baby. And it's going to get to the point over the next few weeks here, Mike, where these might be some viable plays. This week, I don't know, Matt. It's a little bit questionable. But listen, the last few weeks you've hit, so we're not going to get there. But just for the people, next week, week 5, bye weeks. Tennessee, Los Angeles, okay, fine. Philadelphia and Detroit. So obviously Philly and Detroit have a ton of fantasy relevant players on them. So be prepared. If you're in sleeper like myself, click the little next arrow. Have a look to see how many bye weeks and how many zeros you're going to be getting next week. So just a little prep. So Michael,
week 6, just to touch. Week 6 is Chiefs, Rams, Dolphins, and Vikings all on bye. So maybe it doesn't hit you this week. Maybe it hits you next week.
Yeah, then Dallas,
or
Chicago.
2 weeks.
Yeah, man. It's listen, every team's gonna have a bye week. So I know it feels painful. Are you one of these guys, Mike, when you're drafting?
Nope.
Do you really look at bye week? I don't either, right?
I don't either.
Like if it's those onesie choosy positions, like the DSTs or even the kickers. I don't play in any kicker leagues, but for like the DSTs, that sort of thing. Like I used to look at to see, okay, which one has the latest buys? But for the most part, I'm streaming DSTs every single week. So I don't really take it into consideration. But no, it's interesting, man. It's going to be a tough couple of weeks coming up here as we navigate these injuries. But enough chit chat. Let's get into our flex plays of the week.
He's my best friend. He's my pal. He's my homeboy, my rotten soldier. He's my sweet cheese, my good time boy.
Well, Michael, I'm going to say today you are my good time boy because guess what? You showed up early, you showed up on time.
I'm here.
Prepared. You're here, baby. You're here just because you don't want to get fined. Give me your first flex play of the week.
All right, so my first flex play of the week, and if you've been watching this show, you've watched us in the off season. You know, you kind of watch us through draft season. You watch us through when I say draft season, I mean NFL draft season. You watched us through fantasy draft season. You know that we've always been high on this guy. So my first flex play this week is Khalil Shakir. So coming off the Monday night game, he had a solid game on Monday night. He's clearly emerging as Josh Allen's number 1 target. I think we were all hoping that it would be the Dalton Kincaid breakout, and he's had his moments. He's flashed, but it seems that Shakir is his more reliable wide receiver. So, you know, looking at matchups this week, they play Baltimore Sunday night. Baltimore's secondary is pretty tough, but Shakir spends most of his time in the slot. He's going to see Marlon Humphrey a lot, and he'll probably see a little bit of Nate Wiggins. Those are the 2 weaker cornerbacks that Baltimore has. So I like his matchup. I think that we've all been a little bit surprised about what Buffalo's done this year. I think that everybody was slating Buffalo for a huge backslide. Some people had them going like 7-10, 6-11, missing the playoffs. So Josh Allen's over. He can't put the whole team on his back. And that's not what it's been. They've looked really, really good in their first 3 games. So, you know, I think this is going to be a really, really good game Sunday night. I think it's going to be what we expect from these 2 teams. It's a lot of running out of Baltimore. It's going to be James Cook, Josh Allen, Khalil Shakir. So, you know, where you got him, you're getting him 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th round. He's not your wide receiver 1, 2. He's in that flex conversation. I think you plug him in comfortably, and you know, you look for 5 for 56, and you know, better than 50% chance of a touchdown.
Yeah, man. I think really what it comes down to is, and Josh Allen said it himself, whether it was a shot directly at Stephon Diggs or it was just Josh Allen speaking the truth. He's basically saying like he's throwing to the open wide receiver. And a lot of cases, Khalil Shakir, he is continuing to mature. And that's what I like. He's one of these players that after his first couple seasons, like we weren't really sure because this is year 3 now, right? Back in the day, year 3 breakout used to be the thing. Not so much in the modern day NFL because guys are so prepared coming out of college, but there is for a lot of players still that time that it takes to mature, to gain trust, and then ultimately take advantage of an opportunity where there's a gap, right? And I think ultimately, like whatever happened with Steph Diggs, he played himself out of Buffalo. It was one of those things where at the end of last season, anyways, Mike, Joshie was distributing the ball to the open wide receiver. He wasn't forcing the ball to Stephon Diggs, which is one of the reasons Diggs was probably so upset with how it ended there in Buffalo. But how could you hate it? And listen, if you went with Kincaid and you took a relatively high draft pick on him, probably round 4, round 5 of your typical leagues, then just have faith, right? Like the tight end position this season is a trash heap. We thought, and it's so funny, Mike, how the narrative changes, right? Every single year, looking back on the fact, we always say, okay, there's always going to be a couple studs, and then the tight end position is just an absolute trash heap. Like that's how it is every single year. This year, we came into it thinking, wow, there's actually a pretty deep class. There's like a legitimately 10 to 12 tight ends that we'd love to roster. And guys like David Njoku are hurt. Evan Ingram's hurt. George Kittle's missed time. Travis Kelce looks like a shell of himself. And maybe they're, quote, saving him for the playoffs. Or maybe he's just lost a step. We don't know. Trey McBride's missing this week with the concussion. Like, it's a trash heap out there. So if you have Dalton Kincaid, just say thank you to the fantasy gods. He's playing this week. He's healthy this week. He's got an opportunity because he's in a lineup. But ultimately, it's going to be James Cook. As we've seen, it's been super efficient on the ground, and it's been Khalil Shakir. Now, like I can't remember because I was super high on James Cook when he was drafted out of school, and then I was quickly brought back down to earth that rookie season, mostly because of the Devin Singletary show. But I think we're starting to see a trend here where a lot of these, mid to later round running backs. Now, obviously, James Cook was drafted in round 2, which is one of the reasons we were so excited for him. But these mid to later round running backs, unless they're like a definitive bell cow, like a Bijan Robinson or like of that ilk, it's taking them a couple of years before they're really getting their foot into the NFL and like making a difference every week. And I think it comes down to trust with the coaching staff, right? Like ultimately, these coaches need to know, can you pass protect? Can you catch the ball if it's given to you? And are you reliable on the ground? You're not going to fumble the ball. And James Cook is starting to develop that chemistry with Josh Allen, obviously, both in the passing game, but then on the ground, there's that trust. So I like it, man. It's a consolidated target share. Khalil Shakir, love it. Love the play.
Yep. Yeah, I do too. And I think with these smaller running backs, these non bell cow guys, ones with the specific skill set, you got to have a coaching staff that wants to scheme them up too. So it seemed like in Buffalo, after Joe Brady took over, he was more committed to Devin Singletary, to James Cook's skill set. You see it in Miami with Mike McDaniel and Devon Achane. Like he's committed to his skill set. So he's not a guy that you think would be a typical NFL running back, but week in and week out, he gives you RB1, the RB1 potential because of how he's utilized and how his coach uses him. So it's a combination of things. It's getting used to the one thing that that scares me a little bit is that leaning towards these smaller running backs is the guys that are hitting them are not getting any smaller. So the linebackers are getting bigger, the DTs are getting bigger, the safeties are getting bigger. They're getting bigger, faster, and stronger. So you got to make sure that these guys are landing in the right spot with a coach that knows how to put them in space and keep them safe. And it's also these guys learning how to utilize their skill set and protect themselves as well. Because I mean, they take a shot in the NFL and it puts them out for 3-4 weeks. So it's a maturation and it's a learning process.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too is that the coaches are slow to adapt, I think, a lot of the time, right? And so if you weren't 210 pounds, 215 pounds and up, you were not going to be a workhorse back in the NFL, period. And then we saw, quote, smaller backs like Christian McCaffrey come out there and like change the mold. A guy like Austin Eckler came out there, he's changed the mold. And I think coaches are at the point now where it's like, okay, let's just put the best player on the field, right? I'd say that we kind of thought that was going to happen with Jahmyr Gibbs this season. But David Montgomery has just been so damn good. But you look at other teams like Devon Achane, Even a Kyron Williams isn't necessarily the biggest player. Like these guys, when they're healthy, because that's a key thing, obviously, is that these guys, if they can stay healthy, they're hyper productive on the ground and they're getting yards and they look explosive. So it makes sense that coaches are driving towards these smaller backs. But what it comes down to, and this is the sweet spot here, is how do you get your best players on the field, which at this point, like that's kind of that 200-pound, 190-pound running back, which we would have never touched other than just a scat back right here. They were going to be very, very much third down back, obvious passing situations. These smaller players were going to get on the field, but that also became predictable. So these coaches, I think, are starting to evolve, which is good, and they're getting their best players on the field. But how do you get to that balance where they're getting the touches, but they're not going to get injured? Devon Achane, man, so far he's been electric. Brandon called it, right? Brandon was all over it all offseason. Devon Achane was going to explode. He's going to basically play like a third wide receiver in that Miami offense, and he's been doing that. He's been electric through the air and on the ground. But I always wonder, and we always just at the back of our head said, how long is it going to last? Can he keep taking this up for an entire NFL season? And time will tell. But
yeah,
I think when you draft these types of players, you have to assume they're going to miss some time, right?
Yeah. Well, he also crashed back down last week. He had 8.8 points last week. That's no fault of his own. That's kind of the offense. The offense looks very different with Skylar Thompson than it did with Tua. So, when you have a player whose output is based so largely on who's running the offense, then I think it kind of changes things. Like if we saw Kenny Pickett go in instead of Jalen Hurts in Philly, I don't think it would largely change our outlook for Saquon Barkley. We'd still expect, 21 to 26 touches a game, probably 18 on the ground, 3 to 5 through the air. But I think like when you change who the quarterback is in Miami, it greatly changes the way that offense is able to operate. So I think those are some things that we need to consider with these guys, and where we take them and what our range of expectations is for them.
It's all about expectations, baby. So speaking of expectations, we expect those Las Vegas Raiders to continue to make business decisions, and it kind of feels like Devontae Adams made a business decision this week with the quote hamstring that popped up on Thursday. But business decision I'm going to make this week for my fantasy team, Mike, is I'm starting Jacoby Myers. I enjoyed Jacoby Myers on paper. Yes, it might be a tough matchup versus Cleveland, but we've talked about it on the show. We chase targets, not touchdowns. And Jacoby Myers is a trustworthy player in fantasy football. He had obviously a bit of a week last week, but what it comes down to is I like the fact that he is trusted. He's a trusted target. We've seen it throughout his career. When he left the Patriots, I was devastated because he was a trusted target every single week. And was he a de facto 1? No, but he's a fantastic 2. But what we've seen is that when a player like a Devontae Adams does miss time, Jacoby can step up in spot situations and be the wide receiver 1 for his team. So what I like is he does typically have a safe floor. Obviously, the first couple of weeks weren't great. Last week, he put up about 24 points in PPR. And the thing is that while we kind of think of Jacoby Myers, Mike, as a typically just slot-only type wide receiver, he's only playing about half his snaps in the slot this season, right? So he has been able to work in and out. And it's not a small dude, right? He's 6'2", 203 pounds. So he'd kind of be like, quote, a big slot. But we know that he can play outside. So what I like is that Cleveland does play man defense about 66% of the time. This is best per PFF, and he's expected to have Greg Newsome when he is playing the slot. So Greg Newsome, he's no slouch, right? He's the 17th ranked cornerback in the league so far on the season. So that's great, but I expect he's going to be peppered often, and ultimately he's a trusted target. So one of the things that I like here is that I like the, short sample size, 3 games so far, but what are some stats that pop out so far to start the season? And catchable target rate. So when he's actually targeted, it's an 88.2% target rate, and he's got 15 targets, which rate's actually number 9 in the league, which means that when he's being targeted, he's reliable. So you can trust that. I mean, at this point, Gardner Minshew, he's playing to start, right? If he has another slow start, it's going to be AOC, Aiden O'Connell, that's going to be taken over to that starting position as quarterback. Now, I think AOC is fine, but definitively, like as a pro, Gardner Minshew's the guy. The problem is Gardner is also prone to make mistakes. So Gardner's playing for his job this week, and Jacoby Myers is going to be a big part of that success. So this is per Antonio Pierce. Okay, I love Antonio Pierce as a coach. It's interesting, Mike, because last year he won the job because he won the locker room. It already feels like he's starting to lose the locker room. So it probably just boils down to culture. It always boils down to culture with these types of teams, and we see it again. But this is what Antonio Pierce is. I don't need another Devontae. There's only one, right? I just need the best version of Jacoby Myers. And this week in my fantasy lineups, I just need the best version of Jacoby Myers to put up 12, 13 PPR points for me. As a floor, he gets in the box, maybe puts up a good 20 for you. As a wide receiver 3/flex, I love it all day, Mike.
Yep. And I've always been a Jacoby Myers guy. Correct me if I'm wrong, but he was 7th round or undrafted guy when he came into the league. And
UDFA in
and
2019.
Yeah, and he won the trust of Tom Brady. So anybody that does that becomes a thing, in the league, undrafted, earns the trust of Tom Brady, is obviously a football guy. So I like football guys, and I think this week is going to be big. It's a big. I think Brock Bowers and
Yes.
Jacoby Myers week. Zamir White's been largely disappointing, and I don't really expect that to change much this week,
especially against Cleveland. Cleveland's tough. Needs to run.
Yep.
All right, brother.
Yeah. So I love it. All right, cool. Next flex play. So this guy I drafted him with some expectations, and he fell short week 1, week 2. But a quarterback change really seems like it fueled that entire offense. Next guy I'm talking about is Chuba Hubbard. So all 3 weeks he's been hovering around 50% snap share. He jumped up to about 60 last week after carrying the ball 6 and 10 times in the first 2 weeks. He got 21 carries last week, 3 in the red zone. On the season, he's averaging 5.2 per carry. Caught all 5 of his targets last week, 169 total yards and a touchdown. Good enough for RB4. So I think that Andy Dalton has changed the way that this offense operates a little bit, and quite frankly, I think it changes the way that defensive coordinators scheme against this offense. So with Bryce Young, honestly, he didn't really have to account for the passing game when Bryce Young was in there. He was too small to see over the offensive line. He was having to make throws at odd angles. He wasn't operating the offense very efficiently at all. So Andy Dalton is a professional quarterback. He is clearly competent. He gives Canales more room to run his style of offense. And we've seen what Canales has been able to do with mediocre quarterback play in Geno Smith and Baker Mayfield. Say what you want about them, but those guys were largely middle of the road guys. Canales got a hold of them and propelled them both into the QB1 conversation. So I think we're looking at a similar scenario with Carolina. I think this offense is going to look very, very different moving forward. Cat popping up behind me. Very, very different moving forward now through the rest of the season. I think that what that will do is it'll lighten the box for Chuba Hubbard. It'll give him more room to operate. The only caveat is this might be the beginning of the last few weeks where you can use Chuba Hubbard, because Jonathan Brooks is coming off PUP. He's 4 weeks in now, so I would not be surprised to see him be activated, start practicing, open that kind of 21-day window to appear in games. It'll be a slow ramp up, but I think this week you can count on a bell cow workload for Chuba Hubbard.
Yeah, listen, I don't hate it. And spoiler alert, another player that I'm going to talk about is going to be playing in that game as well. So that's tells you where we feel there. But yeah, Jonathan Brooks, I'm glad you brought him up, because I was pretty bullish on his prospect profile as a rookie, and I have him wherever I could. I tried to draft him this year and threw him on my IR spot. Most leagues that play in have IR spots, even the redraft leagues. What do you think it's going to look like coming back? Because I think you're right about it'll probably be a bit of a timeshare to start, and it's what we talked about even like with James Cook and stuff, where as a rookie, like you need to kind of get acclimated. And for those who don't know, it was an ACL tear, right? I believe.
Yeah, it was. Right? And it was late. It was in November.
Yeah.
So I think, let me just look and see when Carolina's bye is, because I think that's gonna tell us a lot. Hold on a second here.
Yeah. So
really what I think is you're gonna see a very slow ramp up.
It's week 11.
Week 11. So that makes sense. I think you'll see a slow ramp up. He'll probably be back week 6, and you'll start to see that slowly ramp up when they come out of their bye. As you're making your push towards the fantasy playoffs, he'll be kind of ramping up, and he'll be someone who is on. I think he'll be on a lot of championship teams this year.
Mike, what do you think? If say you have have him, and you were kind of hoping he'd be back for week 5. This is Jonathan Brooks. But they do the slow ramp up. They do the 21-day return, which means he probably won't start for another 3 weeks beyond week 4. Like if you have him on your bench and you don't have an IR spot for him, and you say, let's just say an average six bench spots, he's droppable in my book, right? Like I'm not holding the guy for another month.
Yeah, here's the problem: is that you burned a draft spot on him, knowing that he wasn't going to be there to start the season, and knowing that it was anywhere from 4 to 7, 8 weeks. So you've held him for 4 or 5 weeks, and he's cleared to come back week 5. He doesn't come back week 5. Now you've burned him on his dead bench spot for 5 weeks, and whoever was there before week 1, after week 1, that could have been benefiting you this entire time is not benefiting you. So now what do you do? Do you drop him for an Elijah Higgins or a Charlie Kolar or like a tight end that you need to fill in? Or do you drop him for, say, maybe somebody, the Jalen Wright owner got frustrated with him and you drop him? So you're like, what do you pick up in dropping him and adding somebody else in? That's the business decision you have to make. And we can't make that for you. It's a roster by roster decision.
Yeah, I think though, here's the thing, right? Like there's a sunk cost fallacy where I've already spent a high draft pick and he's been sitting on my week. I've already spent 3 weeks with him on my bench, and another week now he's sitting on my bench. The problem becomes if he doesn't start in week 5, and say maybe you've got a couple of Philadelphia Eagles or Detroit Lions players, like say you went Amon-Ra St. Brown in round 1, Saquon Barkley in round 2, and maybe like a Dallas or a Devonta Smith in round 3. No, Smith's obviously hurt, so he's missing this week anyways. But like at that point, like desperate times call for desperate measures. If you need, here's the thing, and I think this is maybe the play here. Generally speaking, we always try to push for upside players on your bench. Like I've got some Roschon Johnson across a bunch of my leagues, just hanging out on my bench. He hasn't done much. Didn't start him last week. I'm probably still not going to start him this week just because I think it's not just your guy Swift that's been struggling. It's that whole O-line. But if it's at the point where you need to take a bloody 0 on your starting lineup to hold the Jonathan Brooks, don't do it. Don't do it. You need points. You cannot sacrifice a spot. But if you can hold them, definitely do it. Here's a bit of a strategy question and more just like maybe an opinion. So this is from Adrian in chat. He's saying, would you guys be worried about Jamar Chase after Bengals are 0-3 in fantasy? And is this worrisome or better down the season? Listen, here's the thing. I'm not really worried about Jamar Chase, period, right? Now, if he had a legging injury, say a hamstring or something like that, and it was like one of those things he was battling through, then yeah, later on in the season, maybe they may quote another business decision. I'm starting to see a theme here, Mike. And he sits just to get himself healthy, right? But we've seen Bengals have slow starts. And the thing is, if you've watched every game, and it's kind of sad, Mike. So my wife's slowly becoming a Bengals fan because she likes Joe Burrow. So I've watched every single Bengals games. Obviously, they played them, the Patriots in week 1, but the Bengals look good. They actually look good. And we saw Jamar Chase just go absolutely ham last week against Washington, where he put up the 2 touchdowns. Our guy Brandon won like over $1,000 on that 2 touchdown bet. Congratulations, Brandon. I'm not worried for Jamar Chase, man. He's a special player. He's one of these guys where you're pretty much never going to bench him unless he's hurt, right? Unless there's like that lingering injury and he's like a decoy. But week 1 and 2, we didn't go all off season. And this is why it's so frustrating. The business side of again, business decisions. The business side of football is we need to show we're in charge. So Jamar Chase didn't get a contract this year. And he didn't fucking practice, excuse my French. He didn't practice the entire offseason. So yeah, of course he's going to start a little bit slow. But Chase went ham last week, so no, I'm not worried at all, Adrian, about Jamar Chase's outlook.
No, and I like his outlook even more with T. Higgins back.
Yeah, so do I, because T. Higgins really opens up the field for him.
Yep.
I think Yoshivas, man, like he's little NFL player.
Yep.
Touchdowns last 2 weeks, and he didn't get. I don't think he got a TD week 1, but he definitely made a difference in week 1.
Mm-hmm.
But you got Yoshivas and. I don't know, man. For all you Jermaine Burton truthers out there, it's going to be a tough season. I don't think you're going to be starting him at all this season unless there's potential injury.
We know a couple of those guys.
Yeah, we do know a couple of those guys. I got lambasted for not drafting them in like an early round 3 rookie pick, but I digress. Okay, so let's get to my next flex pick here, Mike, and we're going to stay at the Carolina game. So I don't know if it's a good thing that we're both kind of on Carolina players or a bad thing because it's still Carolina at the end of the day. But yeah, so my second flex play, excuse me, is I got Deontay Johnson going up against the aforementioned Bengals. Now, let me be clear here. I'm pretty confident the Bengals are going to win this game, and probably handedly. Okay, so right now the implied team total is 21 points, and they are a -5 against the spread. This is the Carolina Panthers going up against Cincinnati. So Vegas likes Cincinnati. I think we both would choose Cincinnati. And I'm not convinced that all of a sudden Andy Dalton comes in and Carolina is a different team. Like we see it all the time where there's a benching and the team kind of has like that first like momentum shift for that first week one. And then they settle back down to normal, right? Into mediocrity. So do I expect Carolina to win this game? Absolutely not. If they do, oh man, Bengals fans, that's going to be rough to watch. But at the end of the day, when Bryce Young was starting, Mike, Deontay Johnson was absolutely unstartable. He literally didn't eclipse 5 PPR fantasy points in the first 2 weeks, and he finished as wide receiver 75 and 67. However, having the red rifle himself, we saw that he was impressive. He put up 26 fantasy points last week, finished as the wide receiver 6 overall, and he had an impressive 14 targets. The thing we've always liked about Deontay Johnson, and even despite being a Carolina Panther, I was ahead of Deontay in my draft kit this year because I wanted him on my team. Didn't have to pay like a king's ransom for him. He was going as the wide receiver 37, so definitively a flex. But I was comfortable drafting him as a wide receiver 3. And what we found throughout his entire career is that Deontay is one of these types of players where he gets the ball. He earns targets every single week. And yes, Xavier Leggett, who is, maybe we'll discuss him a little bit later on. Yeah, he's okay as a deep ball option, but really what it comes down to is it's Deontay's game. So I'm comfortable. I'm getting Deontay in all my lineups this week where I can fit him in. Obviously, it depends on your starting lineups, but Deontay, like if you're staring at like a wide receiver 3 this week, maybe you've got some injuries you're dealing with. Maybe you drafted Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, one of those types of guys, and you're looking for a comfortable wide receiver 3. I think Deontay for the rest of the season, as long as it's Andy Dalton, it's going to be up and down, but he's going to have a pretty safe floor as wide receiver 3, like 10, 12 points every single week in PPR, and he's going to get probably 6-7 touchdowns on the season. So that's actually kind of my stat of the week is so far, Deontay leads the league for wide receivers in red zone targets. He has 7 targets in the red zone. Granted, he only has 1 reception in the red zone, but he still has 7 targets, which means that's who their go-to guy is going to be. It's going to be a lot of Chuba, and it's going to be a lot of Deontay Johnson this week. And yeah, I don't know. The Bengals, they need to win pretty badly, so they're going to win this game, but I like Carolina to put up a bit of a fight.
Yeah, I think we should have seen this coming last week. I stupidly didn't start Deontay in a league where I should have. And when you look at what Canales said early on in training camp, he said, right now we got to find our guys. And we say to ourselves when we're drawing up plays, where's Deontay Johnson? So you look at that. Then you look at after week 2, this new head coach, first-time head coach, is benching the quarterback that his team leveraged their future to go get. He's saying, you know what? 2 weeks in, this guy ain't the guy. This guy, this 36-year-old journeyman veteran, is going to be the one who's not. Dalton had a great run in Cincinnati, but he's been largely a journeyman since then. He had stop in Dallas, stop in New Orleans. Now he's in Carolina. This guy, for all intents and purposes, 2024 version of Joe Flacco gives us a better chance to win than the Heisman Trophy winner and number 1 overall pick from just 2 years ago. So when you layer those two things together, the decision that Canales made to make the move to Dalton and going back and saying that Deontay Johnson is our guy, we got to get the ball in his hands, the offense runs through him. When you look at those two things, this is something that I'm pissed I didn't see it coming last week. I'm pissed I didn't start him. I still end up winning the matchup, but leaving points on the bench is never something that you want to do. But I think we can count on this going forward. And I think what this does is this now lets the Canales offense operate the way we've traditionally seen it. So you look at what happened, who produced 2 years ago up in Seattle, and then last year when he was in Tampa Bay. Like those were prolific passing offenses. Both of those quarterbacks threw for over 4,200 yards. The big alpha stud receivers are the ones who ate, which is why I'm optimistic about Leggett. And then you look at what happened last year when they didn't figure out how to use Godwin initially, but once they figured out how to use him, he thrived as well. So, hearing him come in and say that about Deontay made me real optimistic, but we didn't see it week 1 and 2, but it was a quarterback thing, not an offensive scheme thing. So I feel really good about this. I was optimistic for Bryce Young, thinking that if anybody could fix him, it was Canales, and seeing Canales pull the plug that quickly really made me think that I don't know how much of a future this kid has as a starter in the NFL.
I think clearly Bryce Young lost the locker room, right? And once you've lost the locker room, and he hasn't – listen, he should have not started last year. He should have sat. He should have learned. He looked overwhelmed last year. And then this year, he looks pretty much the exact same. Like, he hasn't grown at all. It reminds me a lot of when Zach Wilson started with the Jets the last couple of years, right? Like, he just looked unprepared. It's like he wasn't trying. Like, Bryce Young has a really solid head on his shoulders, right? He's a good, very, very smart football player. But when he's in a position, like, listen, look at Caleb Williams. Let's just pivot to Caleb Williams for a second, okay? First overall pick this year. Obviously, it's what Carolina mortgaged to get Bryce Young. We came into the season. I think Caleb Williams is a good player. I mean, we had, our doubts a little bit just because, again, the dysfunction that is Chicago. But on paper, he had an all-star cast catching the ball from him, right? They went out, they got Roma Dunze, they got Keenan Allen, as well as, of course, they still had DJ Moore. And Chicago's largely struggled. But you've seen glimpses from Caleb Williams, right? And you can trust the profile. Like, you kind of know this guy should be able to go and battle adversity. But Bryce Young has never looked good. I don't even know if he's really had moments, Mike. I can't say I've watched a lot of the Carolina games minute by minute, but he never really looked comfortable. And in the first 2 weeks this year, he looked atrocious, incapable of managing an NFL offense. He had to sit. So it's unfortunate if you're a Carolina Panthers fan because they got set back 5 years, realistically, right, with this. When you look at, okay, they still have, I think next year they still lose their second, if I recall. So at least they have their first next year, but it's going to be rough, man. They don't really have a superstar receiving cast. Love Deontay. I think he's great, but they don't have much after him. Xavier Legette, we never were high on as a prospect. We think that was another bad pick. But ultimately, what it comes down to is for Deontay Johnson, for Chuba Hubbard, for Jonathan Brooks when he comes back, Andy Dalton can at least run that offense. Now, here's the thing. Andy Dalton ain't young. But what if he gets hurt and they have to go back to Bryce Young? That's a worry in the back of my head. I don't even know who the third string quarterback is in that team, but that's going to be rough. Hey, I'm going to check right now. But do you think, Mike, if Andy Dalton does get hurt, I don't even know if they have 3 quarterbacks on the roster. Looks like just had Andy Dalton and Bryce Young. Like, that could be rough. That could be absolutely painful. I guess Ryan Tannehill's still out there.
Ryan Tannehill. Yep, that's what I was gonna say.
Yeah.
So,
all right, brother. Give me a few like kind of flexi / like lower on the depth chart, but guys you're considering this week.
So lower on the depth chart, I'm looking at both of the Jets wide receiver 2s. So this is not saying you should go play them both in DFS or saying that if you have them both on your roster, you should put them both in. What I'm saying is that if you own either Mike Williams or Alan Lazard, I think you can plug them both into a flex spot with reasonable expectations. So we kind of look at last week, what happened. Actually, we look last week to the Jets New England game where Garrett Wilson saw a ton of Christian Gonzalez. We saw Lazard catch touchdown. We also saw Garrett Wilson catch touchdown at the end of the game, but that was more like that felt a little more garbage timey. It looked like Rodgers was looking to Lazard because he knew that he had the better matchup. So the same thing last week when Evans went up against Patrick Surtain. Chris Godwin was the one that benefited mostly from that. So that leads us to Mike Williams or Alan Lazard. It seems that the team would prefer Mike Williams. They went out and spent a lot of money to get him this offseason, and they're ramping him up. But it seems like Aaron Rodgers would prefer Alan Lazard. So it seems like Rodgers has a weird broke-back thing for Lazard where he can't quit him, he can't let him go. And it kind of reminds me of the situation, I think it was in 2015. It was one of the first years I started playing fantasy, where it was I believe James Jones was a receiver.
You only started playing fantasy football in 2015?
Yeah, yep. First time I played.
Damn,
I've only been playing for 9 years.
Man.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, very, very late bloomer. Yeah, I believe James Jones was the receiver on that Packers team. And
I remember. Yes,
it was one of those situations where like every single week he scored a touchdown, and every single week I just threw him in my flex because I knew he was going to get the looks, and if he got the looks, chances are he was. I think he caught like 10 touchdowns that year. I see a similar progression for Lazard coming up here. So that's that's why I like this.
Allen Lazard is 17 ranked wide receiver on the season. It's crazy. Like week that's 1, cool. 26 points. Week 2, a dub with 3 points against Tennessee. And then week 3 against New England, 13.8 points. So it's filthy, it's nasty, but this is kind of where we're at in 2024. I don't hate it. Mike Williams, he kind of, I don't know, he's definitely the third fiddle, right? Mm-hmm. Like he had 0 points week 1. He only had an 18% snap share. He has 65% snap share in week 2, and then 45% snap share last week versus New England. This is, of course, Mike Williams. So I'm not as confident starting Mike Williams this week, but Allen Lazard, man, I've got him in a few leagues, and I'm considering. I think I've got him on my bench this week just because I've got some decent players still going. But yeah, man, I don't hate it. And as far how far we've come,
yeah.
So kind of in the same ilk, I've got Greg Dortch and Michael Wilson going up against Washington. I think at this point in the season, Mike, like it's you start your wide receivers against Washington, right? Like if you can fit them into your lineup, you do it. Now, are you probably starting Greg Dortch or Michael Wilson like a regular traditional redraft league? Probably not. But in a lot of our deeper dynasty leagues where you're looking for players to start not flex, where a lot of times it's start 3 wide receivers, start 2 flexes in a PPR league, like either one of these guys is solid. But so just a few stats. So this is per Razzball. Washington is, of course, leading the league in terms of fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. That's 52. We saw Jamar Chase go absolutely ham last week. I think Marvin Harrison is poised just to have another absolute nuclear week. Maybe he can get another 2 touchdowns. I'm pretty sure Brandon did put the bet on him to score another 2 touchdowns. So we hope for that bet. But ultimately, the big thing here too is and this is important, Trey McBride has been ruled out with a concussion, right? Which means he's out for this week. So again, it's going to be a consolidated target share. And Dortch to Torch, man, he's going to be solid for PPR option. He's trusted, he's reliable. And then Michael Wilson, like, this was a player that I wasn't particularly high on when he came out of school. But there's a lot of really smart analysts out there. I know like a player profiler, they really liked Michael Wilson. And I know Flex Matt enjoys his game as well. So Michael Wilson, he's a good potential target in the end zone, which I like to see. But if I had to choose of the 2 guys, I'm probably leaning Greg Dortch just because in PPR he's got a safer floor. But Michael Wilson's likely going to be the guy to get that touchdown. When you look at the distribution of fantasy points, it's actually pretty even, Mike, in terms of wideout. So 57% fantasy points have gone to the wideouts and 43% to the slot wide receiver. So Dortch, of course, typically playing in the slot. Might be as simple as that, but I think both these guys, if you're in a pinch, totally comfortable starting them.
Yep. Yeah. Washington allowing second most fantasy points per game to the slot receiver. They're also allowing the first most fantasy points per game to entire wide receiver cores, and are second in the league in fantasy points over expected to wide receiver cores. So all that to say, Washington secondary is a hot goddamn mess, and Greg Dortch and Marvin Harrison Jr. are going to be the beneficiaries of said hot mess.
Let me ask you this question, Mike, and I can't remember how you had him ranked. I think I copped out, and I had Caleb as my QB1 for rookie drafts this year, and Jaden Daniels was my QB2. If we did it all over again, knowing what we know as of this moment, do you think Jaden Daniels would go as QB1 over Caleb?
In Dynasty?
In Dynasty, we're talking about Dynasty rookie drafts.
No, I don't, because I think that this is going to be the only year that Caleb Williams plays with Matt Eberflus and Shane Waldron. So I think that from Ryan Pohl's standpoint, trading Justin Fields and drafting Caleb Williams was as much about the next coaching staff as it was winning with this coaching staff. So
Okay.
you have Caleb Williams on a rookie deal. You have DJ Moore locked up long-term. You have Roma Dunze on a rookie deal. You have that defense that Eberflus has, to his credit, has done a great job building.
Yes.
You have those three pieces in place, but Eberflus is a terrible head coach. I don't think there's any debating that. And Waldron, I said this all along, Brandon disagreed with me, but I think that Eberflus picked Waldron as his OC because he wanted an OC who would run a conservative game plan and who was willing to keep them in 17-14, 21-17 games. And if I went back and I looked at all the OCs that Eberflus interviewed to fill that opening, and none of them were like the young gun names. Really, the only one that was established at all was Waldron. And we saw what Waldron did in Seattle with Pete. And I think that Eberflus views himself as the same kind of head coach as Pete, where, you know, he's a defensive-minded head coach, wants to run the ball, control the clock, and is fine winning in these close, low-scoring games. But I think that after this season, I would be surprised if we don't see a full staff change in Chicago, unless they rally at the end of the season somehow.
Yeah.
I don't see that happening. So I think that when you look at like a Bobby Slowick, is Chicago appealing to Bobby Slowick if he's got Caleb Williams, DJ Moore, and Roma Dunze, and he can pick whichever running back he wants coming out of this class? And by all accounts, this is a pretty solid running back class that's coming out this year. Is that more appealing to somebody like that? I think it is. And so I think for that reason, I still have to lean Caleb a little bit over Jaden Daniels. That said, if we get to the beginning of next year, I might be leaning, and Waldron and Eberflus are still there. I might lean Jaden Daniels, but I think that Caleb Williams has more ways to be long-term successful.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good answer. So Bobby Slowick's the OC now for Houston. Houston hasn't looked fantastic on the passing game, right? Like last year they looked special. This year they looked a little bad, but they don't look like, oh my God, mind melting in that offense.
Yeah, you got a full year of tape on CJ Stroud. Yeah. CJ Stroud took the league by storm. Like nobody saw him coming. Now you got a full year of tape on him. And if it's not Slowick, it could be a Slowick type guy. I doubt that it would be Johnson coming over from Detroit, but I think somebody like that. I'm hard pressed to see polls going in the direction of another defensive minded head coach. I hated it for Fields when they brought in Eberflus, and I wish that Fields hadn't gone to Pittsburgh, but it seems like he's doing well there. Not how we want to see him do well, but it seems like he's doing well there. So you're happy for him on that.
So Mike, you would agree that CJ Stroud has had a Slowick start to the season? There we go.
It's that Canadian.
Okay.
That clean.
No. Had to do it. Okay, so just a few players that I want to just honorable mention for this week. We've basically touched most of them, but I think that if you are looking to start Braylon Allen in a pinch, like this is risky. Really, what it comes down to is Jets are favored by 6 points, and we've seen his carries last week: 11 carries, 3 targets. And his usage has increased literally every single week. So I don't think it's ever going to get to the point, Mike, where it's like a clean on 50-50 timeshare between him and
Breece.
Thank you, Breece Hall. God, my brain farted there for a sec. Between him and Breece, because Breece is he's special. He is like the Saquon type player that can break it every single week. But man, Braylon Allen, he came out and he was like, You guys listened to the show last week. Brandon had a bit of a rant about how far Braylon Allen fell in the draft, and like he should have been a Dallas Cowboy. Like he should have just been a freaking Dallas Cowboy. But he's a Jet, and he's a good player. He's very, very young. He's got the trust of the coaching staff. So if in a pinch, and probably I wouldn't really lean towards this in a PPR style league, maybe 0.5 and under. But don't hate Braylon Allen this week as a potential spot start.
Yep. I like it.
Any honorable mentions for you, Mike?
I got a couple honorable mentions. In New Orleans, Foster Moreau is somebody that you can, I'm not going to say put in and feel good about, but Olave popped up with a hamstring yesterday. They have that offense has not looked great. Taysom Hill is back, but Juwan Johnson hasn't looked great. So they like Foster Moreau. Foster Moreau has had a couple of touchdowns called back. He's had a couple touchdowns wiped off the board. So I like him. Out in Arizona, we know Trey McBride is out. So Elijah Higgins, if you have to, these are all for people who are scraping the bottom of the barrel for tight end. Elijah Higgins is somebody that you can grab who's probably on your waiver wire. Plop him in for Trey McBride. Don't expect Trey McBride like numbers, but like, could you expect 4 for 37 and a touchdown? Probably. Maybe not the touchdown, but 4 for 37 get you 7.4 when you were staring down the barrel of a 0. I wouldn't hate that. And then in that Carolina game as well, Xavier Legette, Deontay Johnson popped up with a hamstring, I think at the end of the game last week or beginning of the practice week this week. So this may be the week that we
should start.
He should start, but if we see any in-game setback or he might just not have the burst that he had last week, this could be a week where we see Legette kind of take a next step and show a little bit of that pedigree.
By the way, thank you for being true to yourself, Mike. All show you've been very positive, very, very, very sunny outlook, but you had to have a little wet blanket take just to finish the show against Deontay Johnson in my flex play. So no, I appreciate that, Mike. You got to stay true to yourself and true to us. So,
always on brand. Always on brand.
Yeah. Exactly. We got a question here in the chat from Roundhouse 99. Dynasty full PPR. Okay, 1.7 PPR for tight ends. Oh, that's a super tight end premium.
That is.
Start 11, 12 teams. Okay, so it looks like he is 1-5 with the median, and probably needs a wide receiver. Have an offer of Brandon Ayuk and Tank Bigsby for Ladd McConkey, Jacoby Myers, and J.K. Dobbins. So it's Brandon Ayuk and Tank Bigsby for Ladd McConkey, Jacoby Myers, and Dobbins. And then he says, should he try to counter with Engram and Myers and Dobbins instead of maybe to get Braylon Allen instead? Yeah, listen, I would absolutely prefer Braylon Allen over Tank Bigsby. I know there's, like the Dynasty Bros loved Tank Bigsby. He's okay at best, right? Like he's not. I don't think he's anything special. He's very replaceable. So Braylon Allen's special because he's big. He's just a big human being. Like you can't teach that, and he's reliable. So if you can get a Braylon Allen over a Tank Bigsby, so you go Brandon Ayuk and Braylon Allen, I would probably make that trade. Like Ladd McConkey, we like, but he's still not producing today. Jacoby Myers, we like him today. J.K. Dobbins, he is one tackle away from missing the rest of the season, right? Like he even came back down to earth last week, excuse me. So I'm okay making that trade for Brandon Ayuk and Braylon Allen. I wouldn't make that trade for Ayuk and Bigsby. I just wouldn't do it because at that point,
I wouldn't.
You don't have enough upside for the depth that you're sacrificing because you can start all three McConkey, Myers, and Dobbins. You're basically trading 3 starters for 1 flex. So I don't love that. Brandon Ayuk this week, what do you think, Mike? Like it's going to be another tough week for him, right? Going up against the Patriots, he's going to get Christian Gonzalez.
We talked about Juwan Jennings before the show. We were talking about maybe putting him in there as a flex play. I think it's going to be another tough week for Ayuk. Christian Gonzalez looked really good last week against Garrett Wilson. And I think you got Kittle's probably going to play. Deebo's probably not going to play. So I think that Ayuk he's probably going to be third on that team in receiving this week.
Yeah, and Kittle is confirmed he is going to play for sure. So barring some unknown at this point in the next 24 hours, like he's going to play. So yeah, I would consider doing that if you can get Braylon Allen back, but I would try to hang on to Ladd McConkey if you can. That's the other thing too. Like I'm just as comfortable. You know what, Mike? I'm kind of talking through this. He is 1-5. He needs points this week. So I'm probably hanging on to. I'm starting Myers. I'm starting Dobbins this week.
If he needs points this week, I would say keep that. I know he's 1-5. He's 11th out of 12 in his league. Yeah. For this week, I would say I like the McConkey, the Myers side.
We do. Yeah.
Going forward though, if you decide that you're not in contention and you're plunging yourself into the Alan Sazowski patented trademark productive struggle, then I would say I'm fine with the Ayuk Brandon Allen side. Ayuk just signed that monster deal. He's going to be there for a while. Not for Bigsby right now. Jacksonville coaching staff is the odds-on favorite to be the first coaching staff fired during the season. So I think that we see a total changing of the guard down there. But Braylon Allen is the real deal.
Yeah, and listen, in a 1.75 PPR for tight ends, I am not trading away Evan Ingram. I will not do that. He's just too valuable in the offense. Obviously, he's been hurt. He's missed some time. He's missing this week again. So it hurts. But he's a real difference maker in tight end super premium leagues like that because he is a reliable target. So, this might be tough to say, but I'd say probably I would stand pat. Brendan Ayuk will have his weeks. Okay, he's gonna be good. He's gonna be okay. But I like Jacoby Myers. He's pretty reliable. J.K. Dobbins right now. He's gonna get you fantasy points. Ladd McConkey. It's gonna take a little bit of time. You're gonna have to be patient. So,
Here's the play. Turn it down after Ayuk lays another egg. Go back with Ayuk and Braylon Allen this week because Ayuk's probably going to disappoint this week. So decline the trade. Bring it back next week with Ayuk and Braylon Allen for those same three.
All right, man. Okay, so speaking of trash heaps, we have Flex Matt's trash heaps for the week. So y'all ready for this? Yeah. Trey Tucker going up against Cleveland. You got Adonai Mitchell going up against Pittsburgh. That is risky as hell. And then Johnny Munt, the Minnesota tight end, going up against Green Bay. Listen, if you're starting any three of these players, you truly are in a trash heap type situation, and may the fantasy gods have mercy on your soul. That's all we got for the week, Mike. Any closing thoughts before we give their time back to the people?
Nope. Go out there. If you don't have any wins yet, get your first win. If you are sitting there with one win, you're fine. Don't sweat it and just prepare for the bye weeks ahead.
There you go, baby. The bye weeks are coming. So go check out all of our content over at dfsarmy.com, dfsarmy.com. We, of course, are the fantasy football focused channel. YouTube channel. So if you're new to this channel, thank you so much. Please make sure you subscribe to this channel because we are a different channel than the main DFS Army Slate channel. That's talking everything and anything DFS. Go check that channel out as well. Go check out dfsarmy.com. We have so many sports. We have all the sports, Mike. We got all the sports over at dfsarmy.com. But of course, we specialize in fantasy football. The flagship tool of DFS Army is the Domination Station tool, which helps you manage your DFS lineups. The key thing is, and this is what I think what really differentiates DFS Army versus other DFS Army sites. One, we have true winning players every single week, winning not just regular money, but literally life-changing money. We, of course, if you guys have been following the channel for a long time, we know that Bobby Wow, who's a longtime member, he actually has won the Millie Maker twice, not once, but twice. Now, the second time he split it, so still good, not a full $1 million, but a cool, clean 500,000 USD. He actually has a show on this podcast channel as well, and he talks about some of his favorite plays for FanDuel every single week. So make sure you're subscribed to the podcast feed. Make sure you're subscribed to both the fantasy football channel as well as the main channel on YouTube, and make sure you are signed up as a VIP member over at dfsarmy.com. So for Flex Mike, I'm Flex Shane, and we are, of course, the DFS Army Fantasy Football Show. Good luck in week 4.